Hello everyone, here's part 2 of this week. We're looking at the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. The Middle Kingdom of Egypt where we mark the Middle Kingdom of Egypt as historians is really with the reunification, what's known as the reunification, and the rise of the pharaoh Mentuhotep II of the 11th dynasty. He conquered Heracleopolis in 2033 BCE, and he re-expanded the Kingdom of Egypt into Nubia and Sinai, which had been claimed by various different cultures by 2033 BCE. So really, he takes over these three cities again, all in the name of Egypt. And here we really, with Mentuhotep II and his success in these three cities, we begin to see the cult of the ruler, that is the worship of the pharaoh as a godlike figure. There is a deification or the creation of a god myth of the pharaoh during life, which is then carried into death, and we see that with the building of the pyramids, which are really supposed to be these kind of big burial tombs for gods, right? And the pharaohs are there because the pharaohs at this moment begin to be seen as gods. The 12th dynasty was started a upward ascendance in Egyptian culture. There was a usurpation of Mentuhotep the fourth by Amenemhet the first, and this was done through a possible civil war. We understand some of this by an old text, the oldest text of ancient Egyptian society that we hold today, called the Prophecy of Neferti, that tells us about the Old Kingdom, which we discussed last week, and how it was going to be taken over by a pharaoh, a godlike pharaoh of the south. Or at least this is what it appears to tell us. In truth, there is no historian that knows exactly what the prophecy of Neferti says. And we can't be sure that it's talking necessarily about an actual pharaoh, or if it's a story, or if it's supposed to be some sort of symbolic piece of writing. We don't know for sure. However, it does appear to give an actual prophecy because it is what happens. The usurpation by Amenemhet I through the civil war that could have occurred was a southern usurpation. And he made an alliance with the nomarchs. This created, again, a social shift, kind of like we see in Babylon, where there was a landed elite, that is, a landed aristocracy, and an end of an absolute power of authority by a pharaoh. And there was an establishment of co-regency. So that is two families or two groups of people ruling together. Senusret III, who was pharaoh from 1878 to 1839 BCE, really helped to create a relationship with the Mediterranean world. That is, he created a kind of trade system through the entire Mediterranean basin, which helped to fortify the cities of Delta and Sinai. He continued his expansion into the Oasis and controlled important resources for those trade routes. So he even, because of his success in trade and in kind of creating this system of waterways, he was able to gain a stronger control over the city of Nubia. And he created certain administrative reforms that weakened the control of the nomarchs. So we begin to see kind of an erosion of that dual group rule, and you begin seeing a rise again of the absolute power of the pharaoh. By the time we get to Amenemhet III, we really start getting a golden age of the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. Amenemhet III ruled from 1860 to 1814 BCE. And he continued that expansion that Senusret started of the oasis mining, giving him more and more access to raw materials that were necessary. He built the Great Canal of Meru, which again expanded the waterways for trade. And he was also responsible in his time for the Black Pyramid of Dashur, which is one of the greatest pyramids of the Egyptian Empire at this moment, and along with the entire Hawara funeral complex. So we get more of these pyramids, more of these big funeral complexes, which showed the godlike strength of the pharaohs after they passed. But the pyramids were also a show of power to anyone who tried to, I guess, for lack of a better term, tried to usurp Egyptian power. They also used pyramid forms because the Egyptians believed that the world was created on this kind of primordial mountain. So it was also a symbol of the creation of the world, almost like the creation of the world was made by the Egyptian pharaohs, by these godlike beings that were mortals and ruling over this very powerful empire. Unfortunately, after Amenemhat III, there is a succession crisis. No one's really sure who's supposed to take power, and there was a 4-year reign by a weaker pharaoh named Sobek-Neferu, which was not very successful. There's an intermediate period after Amenemhat. Eventually, there is the collapse of the 12th dynasty, which was Amenemhat's dynasty, and a return to a kind of regionalism. The 13th dynasty controlled Middle Egypt up until the city of Memphis. The 14th dynasty controlled the Nile Delta. So there was this split in power. And Canaanites, which were another group with a possible connection to the Israelites, might have been part of that Nile Delta 14th dynasty, but we can't be sure. Here's where you start seeing more spread of a Semitic culture that is what later will become the culture of the Hebrews. And Semitic is significant of the language. Hebrew language is a Semitic language. This was an ironically stable period for Egypt and the Middle Kingdom, even though there's kind of all of this back and forth between who's actually in control. Eventually, we see in Egyptian writing this word Hyksos, right? And Hyksos is Egyptian for rulers of foreign countries. So we can't really be sure who the Hyksos are. But the 13th and 14th dynasty eventually start to decline as well because of a combination of plague and famine. Nomadic pastoralists in the Amorite period of Mesopotamia start dying out because of plague and famine, and there's an invasion and simultaneous migration into the Egyptian Middle Kingdom by these Hyksos, whoever the Hyksos may be. All we know is that this term means not Egyptian. So it could be Westerners coming in from Europe, it could be Israelites, it could be Babylonians, it could be any number of people. However, the invasions were often done through horse, chariot, and various types of weaponry from this period. There you can see a picture of a crossbow. So it was a pretty sophisticated technological time. So this happened rather quickly, this invasion by these Hyksos. The Hyksos eventually ended up taking control of both the 13th and 14th dynasty territories. There's an unspecified number of rulers in this period. There's about 4 confirmed, but some of them were possibly related, some of them were possibly not related. We're not really sure. But there was an establishment of a separate dynasty in Thebes between the 16th and 17th dynasties, and these were all areas that were conquered by foreigners, Hyksos, and they acted as vassals for one another.